the Carter Center, Board Directors of Foreign Affairs Latin America, Leadership Council of the Sustainable Development Solutions Network, and Club of Madrid. Since the year 2000, he has chaired the Executive Club USA Caribbean, organized by the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Leonel Fernández is also president of the Eminent Persons Group of ACP countries and a founding member of the advisory board of the Center for Latin American Studies at Georgetown University. I'd like to introduce you all to Professor Mauricio Cardenas, Professor of Professional Practice in Global Leadership and Director of the MPA in Global Leadership. Please join me in welcoming Professor Cardenas.
Priscilla, thank you so much. Bienvenido, Presidente Leonel. Welcome, President Fernández. It's a great honor for us to host you here at Columbia University, SIPA, School of International Public Affairs. We have a limited amount of time, so I think we all want to hear from you and interact with students. Let me say just a word about the students that are here. Part of the Global Leadership Program, they're mid-career students. They all have very accomplished careers, have essentially brought them here to spend a year and learn about leadership. And what part of the training is to learn directly from leaders, just like yourself, about your experience, not only on the issues of substance and the issues of day and your views and perspectives on problems of Latin America, but also your own personal journey, your own personal leadership style and the difficult parts of being a leader, which is being elected, creating a party, running again. It's an amazing journey. So I hope questions are going to be very likely and learn from you. I want to take 1 second just to thank Jim Hodge, who is very important and instrumental in bringing you here. It's a very renowned member of our faculty who has taught this group of students amazing skills. And Ivana Rodeo, thank also very much for helping us with this. So the floor is yours, Mr. President. I think you're going to have some initial remarks, and then you'll run the show as you've always done thousands of times. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sí.
Thank you, Professor Cardenas, for such a warm and kind introduction. And thank you again for Ivan for being part of this journey. And people who got together to having me here today. I think it's good to be here. And I'm very glad to be here today, but it has a personal meaning to me. I'm from around the neighborhood. I grew up in 95th Street in African Avenue. So frequently I came by this Columbia University. I even played baseball at the Riverside. We used to have a little league baseball team at the Morningside Heights League Baseball. So I'm from around the neighborhood. I feel like I'm at home, right? And it's for me a pleasure and an honor to share with you some insights and thoughts about the current political movement on this landscape in Latin America. But in order to do so, I would like to have some sort of historical perspective. I'll be very brief to it, but in order to understand current events, you have some sort of historical perspective. And I will start with the Latin American independence. Since the Latin American nations broke up with the European colonial power at the beginning of the 19th century, it was the main idea, the idea of democracy. So in all constitutions that were promulgated in those years, in every country, they all considered democracy to be the political system to be in place. And it was pattern of all sides of the U.S. government. So instead of having a monarchy, with the exception of Brazil, the monarchy in the 19th century, all Latin American countries had an ideal, an aspiration to become a democracy, right? Cindy, I think we'll need your help.
Let's see. Super.
So, talking about the post-independence of America, the privilege of democracy. So, in the early 19th century, that American country fought to challenge democratic politics. But this was an aspiration, an ideal, but it never came through. After the independence, you have 20, 30 years of total chaos, political disorder, and economic stagnation. About 30, 40 years after independence. So it was about 1870 more or less that we began having stable political system in Latin America and some sort of economic growth after 1870. Now, even achieving some sort of political stability and having some sort of economic growth, we're not democracies, with few exceptions. Chile and Brazil. And the reason is, I would say the main scholarly explanation to this is that the Latin American countries were not capitalist countries. They didn't have capitalist development, they were pre-capitalist. And because of that, we were unable to have a democratic political system. We had local caudillos, caciques, right? And they operated with an authoritarian regime. So in reality, it will be later on, it would be with the Mexican Revolution in 1910, beginning of the 20th century, when we will have for the first time a combination of economic growth and stable democratic political system. Now, we hear for the first time the notion of revolution. It's going to be some sort of dichotomy between democracy and revolution in all Latin American history. So the 1910 Mexican Revolution was not only a political revolution in the sense that it transformed a dictatorship into a democracy, the first democracy, full democracy in Latin America, but also was a social revolution. It was a land reform, given land to the peasants, and were included, and were rights on land, and at the same time, it was one of political determination. That's why we have the picture of Emiliano Zapata, who was the symbol of the struggle for peasants to have land. So we move on. Then there's another major event coming from abroad, the Great Depression. The Great Depression that began in the States in October 1929, extended to 30 after the beginning of the Second World War. The Great Depression, not only did it have an economic impact, it had a devastating political impact worldwide. Fascism is a byproduct of the Great Depression, especially in Germany, and that regime came through as a result of an external factor. But in Latin America, the Great Depression enabled the emergence of various dictators. In my country, the Dominican Republic, we have the Trujillo dictator, Rafael Trujillo, long-time dictator. It would not have been possible without the impact of the Great Depression in the Dominican. But also Anastasia Somoza in Nicaragua, Maximiliano Hernández in El Salvador. All these dictatorships were a result of the political impact of the Great Depression. An external factor had this impact on our country. That's what we call the classical Latin American dictatorship. From 1930 to 1950, we have Guatemala, Puerto Rico, El Salvador, Maximiliano Hernández, as I said before, in Honduras, Tiburcio Cañas Andino, Nicaragua, Anastasia Somoza, the elderly, the son will replace it later on. In Peru, Sánchez Cerro, in Cuba, Gerardo Machado, Dominican Republic, Rafael Trujillo, Haiti, Eugenio Barzón, in Venezuela, Juan Vicente Gómez, who governed for 35 years, in the late 19th century until 1935. In Paraguay, Ivo Moringo, Uruguay, Gabriel Garcia. So this is what we call the classical Latin American dictatorship, the first wave of dictatorship in the 20th century. Okay? Then we have a second wave of dictatorship in the region, right after the Second World War until 1959, which is the date in Latin American history. It's a second wave of authoritarian that emerged after the Second World War, during the Cold War. So we have Guatemala, Carlos Castillo Armas, who was ordered to be killed by civilians in Guatemala, El Salvador, in Honduras, Nicaragua, Luis Somoza, the violent son of Anastasia Somoza, who was assassinated. Colombia, Gustavo Sevilla, in Peru, Manuel Diaz, in Haiti, Alfonso Duvalier Papadó, and his son, Jean-Claude Duvalier, in Venezuela, Marco Pérez Jiménez, and Paraguay, and Spanish Trump. The second wave. Now, it's interesting because at the same time that we had a second wave of dictatorship within the Cold War, so anti-communism was the way they were protected and defended by the government, especially during the FDR period. He followed good neighborhood policy, but they were protecting dictatorships in the region. But at the same time, there was a democratic opening after the Second World War. But that democratic opening coincided with what is called Latin American populism. Nowadays, everybody thinks about populism. But classical populism begins, even though there was a populism in Russia at the end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century, and populism in the US, when there was some sort of shift from rural society to a more urban society at the beginning of the 20th century. But Latin American populism is unique because it represented an alliance between an emerging industrial entrepreneurial class and professional middle class. This alliance against traditional landowners, and then shifting from an authoritarian constitutional system, dictatorship, into Latin American populism. Nowadays, it's confusing when you speak about populism because they say Donald Trump is a populist and Hugo Chavez is a populist. So, where exactly, how can we understand Hugo Chavez being a populist and Donald Trump being a populist? We have to kind of look more in detail about the conceptual framework of what populism means nowadays. But they have right-wing populism, left-wing populism, but originally, when we speak about populism, it's a classical Latin American populism coming from the traditional oligarchy, landowners, export-oriented economy, into more industrialized, urbanized, middle-class system that tries to impose a stable political system that can either be democratically or authoritarian, either way. And these are the classical problems. In Mexico, Lázaro Cárdenas, general, after the Mexican Revolution, with Lázaro Cárdenas begins the dominion of the PRI, Partido Revolucionario Institucional. He governed Mexico for over 70 years, until Vicente Fox came into office in the year 2000. Lázaro Cárdenas is well regarded in Mexican history because he nationalized petroleum, he nationalized all the lands and working hands of the oligarchy, and so he is the father of modern Mexico in the modern revolution that Mexico is trying to portray. In Colombia, Jorge Díaz de Gaitán, he didn't come into office, he was assassinated in 1948, giving housing to what in Colombia is called La Violencia. And Jorge Díaz de Gaitán, who was supposed to be elected president in 1948, during that same year, the OAS held its first meeting, creating the charter of the OAS that indicated that representative democracy was the only acceptable political system in the region. So, José María Velasco Ibarra in Ecuador, 3 times president, great public speaker, but he was overthrown by coup d'etat on different occasions. The major historical intellectual figure, Victor Raúl Aya de la Torre in Peru, he was the creator of the APRA movement. APRA is anti-imperialist, pro-Indian organization that was not only active in Peru, but extended to Latin America. My mentor, Juan Bosch, was a great friend of Victor Raúl Aya de la Torre, and some of his ideas about social revolution came from the APRA movement. So APRA really has had, I would say, a tremendous influence intellectually, politically, in Latin America, from the 1940s until the beginning of the 1970s. So these were Argentina and Domingo Perón. It is a very controversial case. Sometimes Perón is considered to be a dictator, but in many ways he is more a populist leader. In the sense, why has Perón been able to, still to this day, have support in Argentina? Because he is the creator of the labor code. He introduced social security, increased wages to workers. He allowed the creation of unions, and because he created this social base, within the left out, the marginalized, the poor, what they were called the camisados de Vita Perón, the striplets of the Vita Perón. So Perón is still revered, I mean, in Argentina, and was not considered to be a dictator. Right? So this is Latin American populism that has had a tremendous impact and influence still today in Latin America. Next slide. Okay, so after this populism, the democratic patterns and revolutionary trends. And I go back. This would be the two words that will dominate the political landscape: democracy and revolution. Before dictatorship, right? So what do we see in terms of democratic patterns and revolutionary trends? I talked about the democratic opening after the Second World War, the creation of the UN, the OAS, and the Charter of the Organization of American States. I was in Colombia, in Bogota, and it proclaimed democracy as the cornerstone of the hemisphere political system. Now, since the 1950s, alongside the dictatorships that remain in parallel, several Latin American dictatorships experienced a downfall. And that gave way to a democratic opening. Very shortly, very shortly. These new democratic systems were overthrown by the military, and then they came back again. Democracy beginning the system. So, cycle, political cycle, very active, moving from dictatorship to elected government, going to being overthrown, coming back to military. All this was taking place at the end of the century, beginning of the century. Okay, I have a list here of democratic governments that were overthrown between the 50s and the 60s. Guatemala, Jacobo Arbenz. This was a case because Jacobo Arbenz was a piece between communists. What he did is that he nationalized United Fruit Company, which is an American corporation in the banana export field. And because he nationalized this American company, he was responsible. He was overthrown by the CIA authorities. After that, in Ecuador, José María Velasco for the third time, is elected, overthrown. Argentina, Arturo Frondizi, 1952, he was a democratically elected president and was overthrown, giving birth to the then unstable political system in Argentina. In Peru, Manuel Prado Ugateche, in 1963, Juan Bosch to the Dominican Republic. He was the exile leader against Trujillo, going back to the Dominican Republic in 1962, won a landslide. And 7 months after he was overthrown, a year and a half after the popular uprising in the Dominican Republic to bring back Juan Bosch to power, it was during the Cold War. President Lyndon Johnson mistakenly took the Dominican revolt as a second Cuba ordered a U.S. occupation. Next year we'll have the 60th anniversary of the U.S. military occupation in 1965 to the Dominican Republic. That way, Juan Bosch was unable to come back to power, but he created a party, the Dominican Liberation Party, and I was able, under his leadership and his guidance, to be the first president in 1996 coming from the Dominican Liberation Party. Honduras, 1963, Ramon de la Moral was elected president and overthrown by the military. João Goulart in Brazil, 1964, was also overthrown. Victor Paz Tensoro runs from Bolivia. He is part of the Movimiento Nacionalista Revolucionario, MNR, who held a revolution in 1952 con el análisis de Schwarzenegger, Víctor Concepción, there was also a coup d'etat in 1954, and Adolfo Arias Madrid in Panama, also in 1958. So from 1950s and 60s, in Latin America, we're having all these military or all these military coup d'etat overthrowing democratic elections. So what happens is this: when you believe that you can access power through the democratic process, and that has been impeded, that has been obstructed, then there's a new generation that will find the only way through by revolution. So if we are frustrated, we go to elections, we win the elections, but then we're overthrown. What can we do? So the idea of revolution starts to pick up. So we have four major events that will take place between the 50s and 60s to make this shift for revolution. The first is Cold War, we talked about it. The other is the Opium Revolution. And Kenny Dagan. Kenny Dagan is in very dynamic. He dissented from the British government and was seen as a Marxist and also overthrown. And then the fourth element will come within this revolutionary and democratic pathway because in Cuba in 1959. So through a guerrilla warfare, Captain something to power, bringing the downfall of Fulgencio Batista. With the victory with Fidel Castro's triumph, this revolution had an enormous influence in all that. And so the generation back then was thinking the only way that we can come to power would be through an armed revolution. The other path, at the same time, 1958-59, Rómulo Betancourt to Venezuela. Rómulo Betancourt was elected president. And who was elected? They held an agreement between major political parties, an agreement that is called a Pacto de Compromiso, the pact, an agreement between the Democratic Party that they will alternate through elections. And they did. After Rómulo Betancourt served 5 years, Leonel came in, after him, Rafael Caldera from the Christian Democratic Party. And after Caldera, we did an accounting, and then Carlos Andrés Pérez for the first time. But when Carlos Andrés Pérez came in for the second term, he made an agreement with the IMF to create a structural adjustment program, as they were called at the time, the IMF, implementing austerity measures, and that created some sort of reaction, negative reaction from the population, and that generated what is called the Caracas. Caracas were riots. People took to the streets. There was a lot of, I would say, political turmoil, social unrest at the time in Venezuela. And I would say this is a major event because the Caracas will change forever the dynamics of politics in Venezuela. And I would say Hugo Chavez is the direct consequence of the IMF agreement that was in. Without Caracas, without the riots to go over, there would have been Hugo Chavez. So there was a lot of disappointment with the democratic system taking place now in Venezuela because of corruption, because of inefficiency, because all the wealth coming out from the oil exports to the lower classes, the marginalized, the capitalists. So they became frustrated with democracy and started experimenting with an alternative, and the alternative would be Hugo Chavez. As I said, the Cuban Revolution was very influential, and guerrilla warfare began in different places, even in Venezuela, with Rómulo Betancourt, the Venezuelan Communist Party, took to the mountains. They had a guerrilla that were confronted by the government and dissolved. Colombia, since 48, we had already guerrilla warfare, all these groups. In Peru, Shining Path is a little notice, was also active in guerrilla. In other places, it was urban guerrilla, like in Argentina, in Uruguay, in Brazil. The other were in the countryside. But guerrillas, they were contained in the government at the time. In Central America, Nicaragua, the Sandinista Revolution in 1979, 20 years after the occupation of Cuba. El Salvador, they had the Segundo Partido de la Acción Nacional, didn't come to power. They later did two elections, but they were very active in guerrilla warfare at the time, and in Guatemala itself. So the 1960s and up to the beginning of the 70s, you had many guerrilla warfare taking place in different parts of Latin America. You see the 1979 Sandinista Revolution, in 1979 the New Jew movement with Maurice Bishop in Grenada, a revolution that did not last long because there was a U.S. occupation the year after 1980, right? So guerrillas and revolution were the answer to the frustration and disappointment created by democracies that were unable to deliver, that became corrupted, deviated, and so this was the response, or to the military coups that also was taking place at the end of the 50s and 1960s. Okay, so we move on. Salvador Allende, 1970, 1973. Salvador Allende wanted to implement social revolution but through electoral means. Of course, still a war that it was persuaded with having a socialist revolution 90 miles away from Miami would not allow a socialist movement in continental Latin America. So once again, CIA, other intelligence apparatus in the U.S. intervened, and Allende was overthrown, and we had the dictatorship of Augusto Pinochet for 17 years until 1990. Right? Well, with Pinochet in Chile, Videla in Argentina, and Bordaverde in Uruguay, there's a new model of dictatorship that's being called bureaucratic authoritarian dictatorship. This is in some point by an Argentinian political scientist, Guillermo Gómez, who said that bureaucratic authoritarian regimes were not classical dictatorship, everything was militarized. So bureaucracy was militarized, everything was in the hands of the military. Right? All the major cabinet members were all the, what we call a bureaucratic authoritarian dictatorship that tortured, disappeared, killed people, exiled. It was a very terrible period in regional Latin American history. Brazil, they call it the guerrillas, the guerrillas in Brazil, especially Ernesto Geisel, Uruguay, Bordaverde, Argentina, Rafael Videla. Many of these people were tried after elections, after the democratic transition, and jailed for years. No? In Bolivia, Hugo Banzer, in Chile, of course, Augusto Pinochet. So this was the third wave of dictatorship in Latin America. Okay, at the time that we have these authoritarian bureaucratic regimes in Latin America, politics was considered a struggle between fascism or socialism. It is either fascist or you believe in a socialist revolution. And so it was Chile versus Cuba. This were the two models that were in place at the time. Now, because of the difficulties, because of the hardship created among political leaders from the left, social democrats, many of them migrated to Europe and began having a relationship with European social democratic leaders in Spain, in France, in Germany, etc. And very important events coming from abroad took place that will have an influence in Latin America. The downfall of the dictatorship in Greece, in Portugal, and the death of Francisco Franco in Spain, they gave way to a democratic transition. So the Latin American leaders living in Europe began to see this changes taking place. They said, well, there's a possibility that these dictatorships evolve and have a democratic transition. And so from fascism versus socialism, it came to be democracy versus dictatorship. And so we have a democratic transition in Latin America, beginning into the Dominican Republic in 1978. It's not always recognized, but it began in the Dominican Republic in 1978, in 1979 in Ecuador, and then all through the 80s, there was a democratic transition in Latin America. And this has been a major turning point in Latin American history, because for the first time since independence, we have had over 4 decades of stable political democratic system for the first time. So the only legitimate and legal way to access to power nowadays in Latin America to elections. No more do we allow left-wing guerrillas or right-wing military to do. It has to be two elections. Now, the election is also a process and an experience because elections sometimes tend to be fraudulent. No, elections do not always respond to people's will. So there has been also a major discussion about the integrity of the electoral system in Latin America. But it's a major historical turning point that since the 80s, the only acceptable means to access to power is to election. Another major impact of the Carter administration's human rights policy and claiming for free and fair elections. So Jimmy Carter really had an impact in this transition to democracy in Latin America. The human rights violations, as I spoke before, lack of political legitimacy from the authoritarian bureaucratic regime, and this claim for free and fair elections. But something interesting will happen in this transition to democracy in Latin America. Generally, through the theoretical explanation, a transition to democracy can only take place when there has been economic prosperity. You take the East Asian example. Why does Taiwan or South Korea move into a democratic sense? Because they became prosperous economically and people were pushing for a democratic transition. Many thought that with China's economic growth and China prospering, at some point China will also become democratic. It doesn't always work that way. But in the case of Latin America, it was not because we had economic prosperity, because we were going through a deep economic crisis that enabled this transition to democracy. So it was the lack of prestige coming from the dictatorship and the economic crisis combined that made possible the other external factors, the transition to democracy. So there's a combination of transition to democracy, but also the lost decade from 1980 to 1989. This lost decade was a combination of different factors. Global oil price crisis in 1973. The price of oil was quadrupled from $4 to $12 a barrel. In 1979, once again, there was an increase in oil prices. That created high inflation, rising interest rates, and external debt crisis because Latin America was borrowing from the petrodollars. The oil exporting countries from the Middle East were having so much dollars. They were sending that to Latin America, the government were borrowing, so that became a debt crisis in the 1980s that the Latin American countries were never able to pay. They did it through financial engineering. The great bonds were issued. That was the way to overcome that. And so we had large fiscal deficits because of the oil crisis, because of debt. Then Latin America had large deficit, fiscal deficit. And we'll see how this is going to be solved for the next slide. So the economic problems in the 1980s, there was a proposal that's called the Washington Consensus. In Latin America, it's been labeled as neoliberalism. And neoliberalism means giving way to the static economic development put in place after the Second World War. Industrialization substituted imports. Right? It was more state-centered, and now this is going to be more market-oriented. It's liberalization, so reduction of national budget deficits. Yeah, we needed to do that. Balance the budget, a tax reform system, financial sector liberalization, trade liberalization, so our economy is open to free imports from abroad, especially through the free trade agreements that we have with the U.S. For example, the Dominican Republic, Central American countries. We have the DR free trade agreement. We can export. We export apparel, footwear, plastics, medical equipment into the U.S. economy duty-free, and we import some goods and services from the U.S. economy also on a duty basis. So this is trade liberalization, privatization of state-owned companies. Remember that in the previous stages, it was otherwise. We nationalized some of the assets in hand for the private sector, and that was the other way around. We're going to privatize state-owned companies, right? Deregulation, allowing foreign direct investment, consider foreign investment as a support national, be able to repatriate those dollars abroad. So deregulation is creating a new legal system, allowing and stimulating foreign direct investment, provide secure affordable property rights. This is the neoliberalism of Washington. What do we say about it? I say on the positive side, it was able to create a macroeconomic system that will stabilize. And it will create an environment that will be attractive for investors, local and coming from abroad. On the negative side, what can we say? The Washington consensus of neoliberalism never had an agenda for social issues. They forgot about education, about healthcare, about social security. So a new wave of anti-neoliberalism was created in that. Okay, now we move into the 90s. And in the 90s, we will have a major concept that is going to change everything, globalism. And now we're going to have global economic trends that will have an influence in the electoral cycle in Latin America. This is something new. There's always been a correlation between economics and politics. If the economy is growing, if people feel comfortable with the measures the government is putting in place, most likely the government will get elected. If the economy is stagnating, if there is unemployment, if there is high inflation, most likely the government will lose. Right? Even here today, they say that the Republican Party won because of inflation, because of immigration. But the economy always plays a role. But now the difference is that what we're going to see now is global economic trends influencing local political life. This is new. Okay, let's see how it has operated. As we had a long decade back in the 80s, now we have a golden decade from 2003 to 2013. The main reason is China. China was growing 4% average GDP per year. 12%. So they were demanding everything South America had, from oil, gas, copper, meat, beef, whatever. They were buying. And because of that, then the economies in Venezuela, in Colombia, in Peru, in Chile, everywhere, the economy was growing. It grew for 10 years, something without precedent in Latin American economic history. We grew 5% average per year, the whole region. And because of that, then all the governments were re-elected. What are these prices moved by China? Successful implementation of social safety net programs. Okay, this tax transfer program that they will do people. Okay, if you guarantee that the child will go to school, will give the family $1,000 per month, for example, right? Housing, water supply, electricity, all with something, right? So people kind of improve their conditions of living, their material conditions of living. So there was strong economic growth, commodity prices were booming, implementation of social safety net programs, and diversification of trade relations with not only Europe or the US, now also China. Right? And so this created the golden decade for Latin America. What happened electorally? What happened with elections in those years because of the golden decade? A progressive party, right? Left-wing party, with this 5% GDP growth, were electorally successful. In Venezuela, Hugo Chavez, from 2003, 2013, 2014, 11 years, continuously. Nobody argued there was a fraud. He won by landslide. And the reason is we had oil at $150 a barrel. He was getting a lot of income and using part of that to satisfy needs from sectors that were historically being marginalized. So he became very popular among the popular sectors of Venezuela. That's what happened. Now, his network of a populist, he said, I'm going to implement socialism in the 21st century. No one really knows what socialism in the 21st century means. When he was asked exactly to define what socialism in the 21st century was, he was not social democracy. Of course, it had his style. It was rhetorical, it was media-centered, and it's, his personality, that really made the difference. But Chavez, he was also in Chile, Ricardo Lagos, 2006, Michelle Bachelet, 2006, 2010. So this is the Chileans, they were elected because the economy was growing and they were implementing this sort of program. In Brazil, Lula, when Lula left office, he had 80% approval. He was a rock star, right? And the reason is because all the changes that took place in Brazil. And when he left, we had Dilma Rousseff. At the end, Dilma Rousseff was impeached, but her approval was 4%. So when he left office, he was very unpopular. The reason, China was not growing at 12% anymore. China was going 4%. And now they were demanding less goods and services from South America to Brazil. And that relationship between the economy and the politics played the role of Dilma Rousseff abandoning the scene, very unpopular. In Uruguay, Tabaré and Pepe Mujica, from both, they benefited from those years. Ecuador, Rafael Correa, 10 years in a row. Bolivia, Evo Morales, from 2006 to 2019. Argentina, the Kirchner, from 2003 to 2015, between Néstor and Cristina. Nicaragua, the Electoral, since 2007, that's another case, something different there. Okay. In Paraguay, Fernando Lugo, the first president coming from the left in Paraguay history. At the end, he was overthrown. He didn't complete his term office. But he was able to come because of the economy, how the economy was doing. Okay? Now, after 2013, something's going to happen. It is the impact of the global financial crisis in 2008 that will have now an impact in Latin America. And if we grew at 5% for 10 years, now we're going to grow only 0.5% in the next 5 years. Right? That will create a decrease in tax revenues, public spending reduction, which means austerity measures, and unemployment. With this scenario, what is going to happen? Everybody in office is going to lose elections, necessarily, right? So let's see what happens with the Latin American. A conservative movement. If the progressive were in office, now a conservative movement is coming. It's not ideological. It's just the same. Those who are in office and not able to deliver, we're going to make a change for those who do, they will do so. So an electoral pendulum swung in favor of the conservative position. So now you have the Roberto Kuczynski, Sebastián Piñera, Mauricio Macri, Jair Bolsonaro. Lenin Moreno was a different case. He was supported by Rafael Correa. The ones in office, they split, and he became part of the conservative. Okay? The COVID pandemic also had an economic impact. There was an economic contraction of -7.8%. Okay? Deep health economic and social crisis, another drop in tax revenue. But then the implementation of fiscal and monetary expansion policy, to come out of that whole -7.8 growth, necessarily government would have to put money into the market, but that created inflation, beginning here in the US, in the rest of Latin America. Increase of employment, and rising poverty. So this will also have an impact on the electoral cycle. So let's look at elections from 2018 to 2024, up to this year. During those years, in those 6 years, we have 22 presidential elections from 2018 to 2024. And of those 22 elections, 18 ruling parties lost the presidential election. So there's a huge impact of global economic trends in the electoral cycle. And of those 4 countries that remain in power is Nicaragua and Venezuela. You know, there is a poll about the legality of the result. So you can see how devastating the global economic conditions have had within the system. state elections in Venezuela, now in 2024. Coming up today. For the political landscape. When Maduro came forward in 2013, he came in by the minimum, perhaps less than 100,000 votes over his adversary. The reason is Chavez died in 2013 and the elections were held, but the economy was in a downside. So he didn't have wind blowing in his favor as Chavez did. That was the contrary. So he had to take the burden of a downfall in the economy. So he won by the minimum. He won. 5 years later, in 2018, once again there was a discussion about the legality of the victory of the poll. The opposition did not accept it. They created a parallel government like Juan Guaido, which was recognized internationally by 54 countries, but didn't have any real support inside Venezuela, because the greatest strength that Maduro has is the support of the military. So the military is in full support of this government, and there's no breakdown there to sustain power. Right? Now, coming to 2024, I would say that in 2015, I was an electoral observer representing UNASUR in 2015. Maduro was already in power then, and this was parliamentary election. I remember opposition leaders saying to me that they had no chance of winning because the government had control of everything, the media, propaganda, major media outlets, so there was no way they can compete. But they won the parliamentary. They surprised, they won the parliamentary. And the government had to recognize the victory of the opposition. Now, what happened afterwards is something that should be studied by political science. Because when the opposition began taking control of the parliament, they said that they were going to overthrow Maduro and sit him. They wanted to impeach him and run away. So Maduro radicalized. He became more radical in his politics for the opposition. And then the Supreme Court will nullify the decision taken by the parliament. And so you had a parallel system. So the Supreme Court will obstruct the functions of the Congress, of the Parliament, and so you have a dual power system, which is something very rare. The dual power system between the executive branch, the legislature, and the judicial branch. And then with Guaido, you also have dual power, but you have two different presidents, one recognized internationally, the other recognized internally. Now, 2024, I was there, the observer, in time around again. I could be an observer if I get the trust, the confidence of both parties. The government will have to agree, and the opposition will have to agree. So having the support of both parties, you can become an observer. Then we were there when we were in the team, and what we did was we observed the process of what people do peacefully. People went to the voting booths and they were able to vote. The voting work was accounting. It was delayed, and at the end, they said, well, Maduro won with 53% or something, and Edmundo Gonzalez had this percentage of vote. So Maduro won. Now, that didn't have much credibility because they didn't show the talent. They didn't show exactly how the process took place in every department, in every jurisdiction. Numbers were never presented, just a final count. So that didn't have the credibility. In my report, I had to indicate we're still waiting for the talents to be presented in order to certify who has won. Up until now, it's quite false. Maduro's legitimacy will end on the 10th of January. That's when his current administration will end, and the beginning of a new one. What will happen after January 10th? Something to be seen. In order to have the elections in July 2024, many meetings took place, many agreements were signed between both parties in Qatar, in Norway, finally in Bangladesh. In order to move forward, I think some other agreements will have to be made, exactly looking for what's going to happen in the future. will combine the United States right now being the US. Because there's President Donald Trump, Trump 2.0, second term, in Latin America. And of course, there's a mixed feeling about his election. There's some concern among some countries, others are more cheerful, others are more enthusiastic about a Donald Trump victory. Let's see which countries are those. Those with the skeptical feeling are, of course, Mexico, because of migration and because of already price that has been imposed on import covenants for Mexico. And then there's Venezuela, of course, because of the elections. There's Cuba. President Trump has appointed Marco Rubio, who is from a Cuban family who lives in Florida. And because he has his own cities, his own family background, he's going to have a heartland in Cuba. There's Colombia, with a peace process still pending, with an increase of the coca leaf that's been increasing its production, showing more cocaine in the marketplace. And of course, Nicaragua, which also has some questioning of the American process that has been in there. Enthusiastic government, of course, Argentina. President Milei already came to Mar-a-Lago to meet President-elect Donald Trump. Well, the president has done that. And he has invited himself to be present at the ceremony that will take place on January 20th. In a final goal with President Dictatorships also. So this is the conclusion, is that the need to consolidate the democratic institutions in Latin America, to uphold free and fair elections, respect for human rights. We need to move from representative democracy to more participant democracy, good governance, transparency, and accountability. And the challenges will be the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. Okay? So, with that, I think.
Okay, well, thank you, Mr. President. Most of our students have passed now, and there's class coming here, but they're gonna give us 5 minutes so that we can actually ask a couple questions to you. So if there are any questions, maybe we can collect two, and then you answer, and then we go, because the people are waiting outside. So Lorena? Yeah, would you begin?
Thank you for being here. I'm Lorena. I'm one of the PL. So it's been very informative to speak about what we're learning actually in class and more specific focus on money. I would like to be more specific on the Dominican Republic. And obviously relating what we just learned with your government and what part of all the economic and political landscape happened within your tenure as president. Wondering after your 12 years in government and all the changes that Latin America, especially the Dominican Republic, we believe is an exception because it has exceptional economic growth compared to the rest of the region, and especially what we're seeing as well with the government that was being elected in contrast to other governments in the region. So I was wondering, understanding how you're talking about democracy, etc. What do you think that you did not achieve within your 12 years of government that you think is relevant to the Dominican people now? And what do you think that changed in the Dominican population that you can contribute in a new way?
I would say the Dominican starting from 50 is opportunity to move and the fastest growing part of the moment. When I came in office in 1996, I was with equivalent to 18 billion. When I left office, it was $64 billion. Nowadays, we have 110 billion. The billions continue to grow. I think I focus more on modernization. We were able to modernize the transportation system with the Dominican metro system, two lines was built in time, urbanizing and also diversifying our international relations. I think we did that. more science, we have a real impact, and we were able to guarantee access to public school systems, to the Dominican public school activity. But I think we're still lacking quality. And without that, most likely we'll be left behind. If we don't produce a rapid impact in economy. Where do I think we should head in the future? We have been, first of all, originally agricultural exports. Then we become a service oriented world with free trade zones and tourism. I think the next stage would be high tech. We built the San Domingo Cyber Park. We created the Technological Institute of America. And the idea would be to create a technological corridor connecting with Florida, which is the fourth state of the union in terms of high-tech development, and New York, where we have people in view. The other Dominicans by nature and culture, with this picture of a field, and we'd be able to engage in high-tech development, transversal to everything, it would be healthcare, it would be entrepreneurship, services, professional services, and else. So, having the implementation of high-tech would be the next thing to do.
Let's do a couple more. You had a question?
The case where the international community that they totally interested. But to say that the policemen coming from Kenya, from Africa, to aid Haiti in terms of guaranteeing safety for population is something unseen. Before there was a UN mission, MINUSMA called, they made it for 10 years, but with the help of the Latin American countries, Brazil, Chile, Ecuador, they all helped to fund the UN mission there. Nowadays, nobody wants to get involved. Now, the problem with Haiti is that with the assassination of President Jovenel back in 2021, there's a power vacuum, and gangs have taken control of the country, and there is total unrest in Haiti, and because of that, there's an increased migration. On the Dominican side, there's fear, but people that might migrate to the Dominican side are members of the gangs, and they will create violence and criminality within the Dominican side. So the international system has not been responsive, they should, in the Haitian case. I think the Haitian government has totally collapsed. There's no authority there. They created recently a transitional commission, but the prime minister, the acting prime minister, was overthrown by the other members. So there's total chaos there. There's really no one under control, not against themselves. So for us in the Dominican Republic, it's difficult to open our borders and allow Haitians to come in because we might create chaos and uncertainty within the.
We have a. Sorry, you had raised your hand first. So this is the last question. Sorry, unless you have really. I mean, why don't you just say something quick and then we'll have the two of you and then you wrap up.
Yes.
Okay, very quick.
Gracias, señor presidente, for coming in here. So just going back, kind of like we talked about in terms of consolidation with the two-party system. Obviously, we've seen different Latin American countries kind of the shift between going from progressive state to a more conservative state, even especially now in the Republic. Can you just speak a little bit about kind of like the foundation of your new party, Fuerza del Pueblo? We know that the Fernández been in power for many, many years, and then now this new shift. Can you just like kind of speak on this like now three-party system now that the Republic has, how moving forward that kind of we can shift more back to progressive policies, or what's the future like the three-party system?
The new party. Neil?
Thank you so much, Mr. President. I've deep in both the U.S. and Dominican Republic. I'm an American boy. Half my family is Dominican. I'm curious, Trump 2.0 is very strongly America first. I'm curious your perspective from TR relative to immigration, climate, trade. What are your concerns about?
Sure, Trump 2.0. Nihal.
I wanted to ask about, you talked about the pressure of democracy, I wanted to ask, what other checks and balances are needed in Latin America to maintain democracy, and if
my friend, British friend, amended the Constitution in 2015 for the second consecutive term, not allowed by the 2010 Constitution that we promoted. And okay, he got away with it, but then he wanted to do that again in 2019. So he would say if people have done that, we have created a great environment that would have allowed in the future some sort of demagogue to come in and defeat the legal dictatorship. It's a question of respecting the Constitution and firm limits and the limits of power. And so that was not taken into consideration. Left, we created a new party. We participated in 2020 for the first time with 5% of the vote. Last year, this year, 30%. Probably very good. Trump people do. The Dominican Republic has a big trade, specifically with white. It's already been considered, but next year, 2025, has to be liberalization of white imports into the Dominican Republic. I think the Dominican Republic, the government, is trying to negotiate with the incoming administration to postpone that legalization of white. The 14 provinces in the Dominican Republic depend on white people. And it's part of our daily diet. The problem is that the wine introduced in the U.S., especially in Arkansas, is being subsidized by the U.S. government in its production, subsidized in its export. So it will not be competitive with the Dominican producers to sustain an import liberalized. So this is a major issue for us because we have a tremendous economic impact. Otherwise, I think we have very good relationships either with Democrats or Republicans in the U.S. administration. The third is deliberation. Check and balance. We're going from a representative democracy into a participant democracy. Well, referendum is politically considered by the Constitution. And I think if this is implemented, it will strengthen the active second vote. At this moment, still the Dominican Republic has an plan. The main political parties have even get together to discuss and agree. All the Dominican governments will discuss with the private sector to come together to implement policies that will be beneficial to all populations. It's something that we haven't simply repeat because it's been beneficial to the Dominican Republic over the years. We need to consolidate, still a lot to do in transparency and accountability, a lot to be done there. Anti-corruption policies must be implemented because they target the image and create lack of trust among the population towards political leaders and political parties. So this is something very important. And once again, I think we have to be more, make more emphasis in terms of the problems that we can.
So thank you so much.